Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar on DataOps presented by ACS Solutions. Uh, Thanks everyone for taking the time to join and listen to this conversation on the topic of DataOps and how it promises to solve some of the most challenging issues faced within data environments and by data teams today. So to talk about this particular topic, uh, so my name is Arvind Ramchandra. I'll start by introducing our panelists today. My name is Arvind. I'm the VP of Technology at ACS Solutions, and I head up all the technology practices. Uh, and also have Rodney Boswell, who is one of our senior people with years of experience and so working on data, and is one of the leaders within the data group. We also have Veera. So Veera is one of our senior architects who brings in years of experience of working on different platforms. We have Jason Koirala, who is one of our solution architects. So among the four of us, we'll be covering a host of different topics. Uh, so first off, we'll be starting off with a brief overview about ACS solutions. We'll then talk a little bit about what are the areas that DataOps aims to address, and then we'll put together a definition and talk about the framework for DataOps. We will then jump into key components of ACS solutions approach towards DataOps. Some of it will be a little technical in nature, right? So we'll also do, while we will not do a detailed deep dive into these key components today, but we'll definitely talk about it. So Veera and Jason will walk us through what these key components look like and how they address some of the DataOps, right? And so roadmaps. And then finally, we'll bring it all together. And so we'll talk about the technology, the process, and how data teams can actually make use of our DataOps solution itself. So let's jump straight into it. Uh, so start off with a quick overview about ACS Solutions itself. We're headquartered in Atlanta. We're a privately held company, 20,000 plus employees, and revenue is slightly over $1 billion. We have been in business for about 20 plus years now, and our focus has been major industries, but mostly mid-market to Fortune 100, Fortune 1000 clients. We have our presence is we have offices across the United States with expanded presence in India, Europe, Australia, Canada, and Latin America. We have delivery centers. We have about 5 in the US. We have one in Mexico in Monterrey. India, we have 4 delivery centers with smaller centers in Israel and UK. And we have one center in the APAC region to cover the APAC region in Taipei, based in Taiwan. Um, so with that, so I'm going to start. So let's start talking about today's topic. And so a slightly different way of conducting a webinar. So this is closer to what, right? So Rodney, my colleague, likes to call this like a podcast. So what we'll do is we'll make this more of a dialogue with the kind of experience that this panel brings in. We would like to have a balance between not just make it a monologue, but we'll make it into a conversation about this particular topic. So we all know we're all familiar with the different kind of workloads that data teams handle, whether it is working on multiple data sources, whether it is doing cleaning, and looking at data quality, whether it is just doing data engineering activities, or working on bad jobs and different tasks, or just looking at implementing security. So these have been common workloads that have been around for years now. But there's an additional complexity that's being added because of all of the demand that's coming up in the new data economy, right? So those sources have multiplied in number. There is so much more of demand coming in by different data groups whom we can call as data consumers. Plus the fact that the volume of data itself has so rapidly increased in the last 5 to 10 years. And then there's also the need to move very fast. So Rod, I'm going to sort of put these questions to you. So you bring in years and decades of experience in managing these large, complex data environments in large enterprises. Right. So what has been your your experience. All right. So how true is this? Does this, right? So does this really portray what you have seen in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely, Arvind. Yeah, this, data ops is a new paradigm for reducing cycle time, right? I mean, the challenges that I faced, throughout the years of delivering, solutions around with data. Yes, the complexity is one thing, but the complexity of the asks, are increasing. Now, you know, consumers are wanting to know, additional insights that require additional data sets to be brought in. Might be from a third party or external to brought in to be, brought into the enterprise. That's a challenge. I mean, just can't be happen really quick. I mean, with a large corporate environment, what it's like bringing in a new set of data, go through security, get all that, procured and making sure it's safe for the environment. That takes time. So cycle time, in the old way, I would say, that we had to deal with things. And then prior to Agile and then things of that nature, it took a lot of cycle time. It was very long to deliver, an insight or a set of data to be consumed by another consumer. So yeah, these complexities, are certainly growing in nature, and there's where data ops really comes into play and can really shrink that cycle time and help deliver, what needs to happen quickly.
Right. Yep, and I'm sure that you are seeing one of the most common things that's also heard, Rod, is that the amount of time that's actually being spent on the different activities, right? And there's so much data going around, and it's always been like everybody knows in hindsight, right? And it's more of a tribalistic knowledge that there's
Absolutely.
more and more being, so more and more time is being spent, right? So in behind the scene activity and lesser time being spent on that. So, but how true is this from what you have seen?
Yeah, I will say that the majority of the time to basically acquire data, get it into a format that's consumable, and then optimize it for consumption, that would take weeks before. Now, and the inefficiencies of the data engineers, right, going out trying to find where the data's at without the right tools in place, depending on the maturity of the organization, where you're at on your data management level, that certainly has an impact, right? Do you have a catalog that someone can go reference to find out who owns that data? Can I get access to it? Can I use it? Data engineers spend entirely a lot of time searching for that if they don't have those type of tools at their hands. So the inefficiencies are huge. Now when you shrink that down into this data op framework that you're going to hear more about, you're going to find that cycle time drastically reduces, and you get great efficiency improvements around this. Same way, not a data engineers looking for the data, but the data scientists, right? They got to wait for some things to happen. They got to find their compute zone. They got to get into their infrastructure and get ready to get their models to train and run. It all takes a very long time. And while that's happening, you get the consumers out here just saying, "Hey, when are you going to have that? I want some results." So what you'll notice as we get down the road here on this data op framework, that is going to shrink that time and really, they'll be right there with you in the cockpit going down the path of this and solving these problems.
Absolutely. So let's now then try to put, and there are multiple definitions, right? So going around for data ops, right? So let's try and put a boundary around this. And one is obviously because of all of the trend, the word ops itself is trending quite a bit, right? So you've got DevOps, you've got AI ML, or you've got ML ops, AI ops, and now, and of course, you've got data ops, right? So forming the sort of the benchmark behind that. But if you see, DataOps itself is defined more of trying to bring the best of what DevOps did for the developer world and trying to bring the same kind of a mechanism into the data world. Right. So what some of the key things within that, right? And so what we're trying to introduce here, right, is that concept of a data pod, right? So which is where every team has their own private workspace where they can work on a virtual data set, right? So without overlapping with others, without having to worry about its compute requirements, without having to worry about right, for security and compliance needs. And it's also establishing a data pipeline, which is a series of steps or actions. Right? So a data pipeline has typically meant opening up a channel to access data, but a data pipeline is just like how you could do a build deploy and to build, test, and deploy kind of a pipeline for code, it is building up a similar kind of a pipeline for different purposes, right? So, but do you see this? So, do you think this kind of a separation, Rod, between the data consumers and the data operators, right? So, what do you think will it deliver? Something like this? Uh,
Yeah, Arvind, this does kind of align, you get really in sync with your, the operations aspect of really pulling this data together quickly, and you get the consumer right there with you, to say, look, they're going to be slowed down, and you don't have to wait for another meeting to share the results and review the data that they're going to really consume. This all happens really quick, and the consumer benefits, are certainly, you address any regulatory risk, that's some things that are always a concern when you're developing. And then, basically your data sets at times can be way out of sync that you're building with. Now, bringing that together and really develop and test with production like data is a huge benefit, right, for the consumers, because they're seeing real things. When they're looking at test data, they don't know what that means. Now, when they're looking at production data, they can really relate to that and really get a understanding. And then, these personal environments, you don't have to really share, a whole dev environment with 13 or 15 other teams that are working on things and, have concerns there. This is all really good. From an operations perspective, yeah, I mean, the efficiencies are not only on the time to deliver, but, on your infrastructure. You're going to reduce a lot of storage overhead. You're only going to use what you need to use for what projects are in flight. So, you really, and then sensitive data, right? With the concerns around GDPR and all the other, different data laws that are kind of being formed, you have greater control over the sensitivity and being able to do and manage that data, throughout this process from an operator perspective.
Yep, so, absolutely. And so I think that then brings, so getting to start talking about our framework for data ops, right? And we try to sort of keep it and address the key things that talk about when a framework like this is saying, right? So technology, organization, which is the team, and the process that is typically followed within an organization. And so do you want to sort of right and so highlight some of these?
Yeah, I'd say the technology piece, when you look at that, yeah, cloud is going to give you a lot of enablement and efficiency gains for sure. And being able to track the lineage data and basically lining that data flow up from ingestion to basically hydrating a model or virtualizing and using that, and then going on, right? And then the organization, the team, right? There's a couple different options there. You can decentralized, semi-centralized or decentralized in a mode, but really the roles are key, right? You still need those SMEs, the suppliers of the data, really partnering with them to understand, because they know, what this data means. And then you got the preparers, right? The data engineers that are going through and really understanding with the stewards, to say, okay, that's aligned with some business data. And then you get over to the delivery side of the process. I mean, you really, agile, of course. You want to deliver quickly and, understand if you're off target really quick. So yeah, these are just some of the frameworks, right? So the technology, the organization and process, and later on you'll see a view where this all ties together, with a nice discussion on that when we wrap this up. Yeah, these are the key frameworks.
Okay, great. So the framework then leads us to the key components, right? And here we are really getting into the meat of our approach to data ops. So while it's good to talk about the problem space and the conceptual framework that ACS brings to data ops, so I think this is key, because this is how it really gets implemented, Rod, right? So we have been talking about some of these earlier, like you mentioned, for example, that the whole privacy, security, and compliance aspect, very important, but then also ensuring that data teams have their own environments to work on. So, but these are the components, right? This is how it really gets done. And so within any kind of data environment.
Yeah, you know what, and the big piece here, I think, Arvind, is the virtualized data sets. This is really a game changer when you are quickly and really developing and delivering, insights, or sets of data for people to consume. Virtualizing that, it just happens. You'll be amazed at the cycle time you reduce when you start virtualizing data sets. Personal space, that certainly is a plus with the data pods, and Arvind touched on those earlier, but the data pods, certainly you'll see more of those. but those, being everybody tightly integrated into this group and working on that is really huge plus.
Yeah. And I also think that integrating the data, the workspace into any organization CI/CD cycle, right? So that also becomes pretty important because while while teams have adopted the agile process maybe, but it's the integration of your data environment into your CI/CD pipeline, and whichever that may be, right? So whether you use a Jenkins-based one, whether you're using some of the cloud-native pipelines, right? So CI/CD tools and services that might be being provided, or if you're using a third-party off-the-shelf right, so product, whichever it is, it's a combination of these two that really bring about the benefit, right? So like you mentioned, agile is important, but then you need to have a tool set to support that kind of agility over there, right?
Yeah, definitely. The ability to quickly and continuously integrate, right, and deliver and make that happen quickly is such a big change in the process that really would be an eye opener for folks that haven't been there yet. And when they get there and do that, it really helps getting that delivery across the finish line and getting that integrated quickly without problems, right? Because it helps to really streamline the process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's pull in Vera and Jason, right? So I think we've gone deep enough where let's talk about some of the components a little more in detail now. Right. So Vera and Jason. So let's talk about this a little more about what really constitutes all of the different pieces here, right? And then help us map this back to some of the components, and we'll bring it all together, right? So right to the end, this thing will do that. So Vera, I'm going to click my way through this. So tell me how and when you want to stop. Right. So, but if you want to start talking through this thing, so definitely So do you want to start talking about the details? What goes into these components? And so how is it even implemented? And then show us at least some of the how these are really implemented within an environment, within the platform, right?
Sure, Arvind. I'll be more than glad to do that. Please do go ahead and click through a couple more elements so that we can see what's happening as part of the functional implementation. I personally feel this is more of the end game trailer that you wait and watch in a theater when you're watching a movie, where you basically try to see what's happening internally as part of an organization's implementation of this concept of data ops. As you guys were mentioning, Arvind and Raj, in the previous slides, where we have our four big pillars, the key components that you were mentioning with respect to the virtualization aspect, and then starting to have a private workspace for not just a specific member of a team, but also an agile team to work through their way for doing research purposes or working on their own standalone materials or probably a microservice-based architectural implementation. What you see here is not just going to represent a dev team in a company. The company constitutes of a lot of line of businesses that could just be a part of the development team. It could just be a part of the finance team that is working internally for reporting. What you also see here is could be a call center or an accounting team that is also trying to work their way through dashboards for having these data processes being put in place. And at the same time, just like how you see these different types and lines of businesses inside a company, similar fashion, you also see that the data is not just coming from one single source of truth. It could be an API-based raw data that you're trying to extract from a data warehouse. It could be a redefined set of data mart that is already sitting on your on-prem device. It could be a hybrid cloud-based data that already a couple teams have been working already and has massaged enough that you can actually take it to your application layers and some of the call center people can directly use it for their dashboarding purposes. So the heterogeneous interjunction of data coming through multiple sources is the key part here that we are trying to handle. So let's try to dive a little more deeper onto what this concept of data pod will address, and let's have like a sneak peek of how this entire implementation looks inside an implementation inside a cloud-based service. We'll take an example of AWS here.
Right, and I'm assuming that even just for this for the audience too, Mira, right? So while we are showing this on AWS, right? That's just an example, and of course similar environments for DataOps can be set up even on other cloud environments, or even if you have on-premise distinct deployment data environments too, right?
Exactly. That's the beauty of this architecture, where it's more like these Lego keys that you can plug and play and implement it on any existing architecture or existing environments that you already have in your company. And what you see right here is a virtual representation of this data set creation from different origins of data marts and sources coming through, some picking up from Oracle, some picking up from S3, some picking up from an API based stream, some picking up from a different source. So if you check this virtualization part of data creation, it basically connects heterogeneous data sources.
Okay, so let me keep moving forward, and let me know when you want to stop. So I think here we're talking about some of the data sets and how we can virtualize this on this. Do you want me to keep moving ahead?
What you have seen in the previous slide is where you're trying to connect through different multiple sources that are being requested or raised a request by a specific team or agile Scrum Master or a particular researcher or a scientist. Now what you see here is the creation of the data set, and the CloudWatch that we have set up basically enables log-based monitoring system while you are creating these views, and also make sure that you have the right set available for the right team or the right person in the right time. And next, what you see there is we have taken S3 as an example to hold our virtualized data set created to host as a part file, and have used Athena internally to make sure that the data is pushed to the right resultant data sets. But it pretty much, as you said, depends upon the company or the team. They could use it like a volume to store, or they could use an S3 bucket for this store, or they could use an on-prem Teradata or Terraform based infrastructure setup that was already existing to store, and so on. And as I said, could also access via an API, just like a virtual view. Perfect. What we see now here is a glimpse of how this data pod that looks like, which have the capability of directly connecting to the virtualized data set, either using an API or using a data mount, and also has the compute capability with auto scaling groups and security policies put in place, where a specific team or a user or maybe a data scientist can bring in his or her own applications and then work their way through the data sets that they need. And these pods are container based workspaces which have the capability to upscale, outscale, and also run their own child pods for increasing the efficiency and reducing the cycle time. Perfect. Rod, if you remember initially, you were mentioning about how people are trying to spend a lot of time massaging the data, gathering the resources, trying to
Mhm.
make dashboards out of it for their own internal purposes and monitoring system. These parts here that you see are also capable of connecting to your existing services. It could be quick sites for a simple dashboarding. It could be Informatica based center servers that you're connecting. It could be any other Power BI tools or something that you're using as part of your MicroStrategy, or also can host microservices as we were talking. And finally, the pipeline that we were discussing earlier, where if the company already has pipelines put in place, could be using Jenkins, could be using any other cloud-based technology. Our artifacts straight away can fit into their existing pipeline and help navigate through different environments, different lines of businesses, different teams, and so on. And you can, it's pretty easy between moving dev, test, prod, moving between finance, accounting, and call center teams, or however you want to set it up.
Okay, so then let's start bringing it all together then, Veera.
Yep. So as we were discussing just before we had the sneak peek of the environment, the four major key pillars that you see here, all the way starting from virtualized data sets and having your integrity of data and privacy put in place for the workspaces, personal workspaces that could be created for a team. And at the same time, that doesn't mean the team is isolated or staying mutually exclusive with the company. Although you're getting your own workspace to work, your own data set to work with, your own compute power to run your microservices or MicroStrategy, you still be a part of an existing pipeline where you're continuously integrating and also deploying the changes or updates or anything that you're doing as part of your implementation, and put it back right in the same pipeline that the entire system has started with, which is the
Mhm.
beauty of this.
Yep, absolutely. So, and obviously, while a deep dive into how do you actually set this up within your environment, and how do you apply different kinds of policies, what is required to integrate this, right? So that would be the topic of upcoming webinars,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and then definitely require the audience to and so join that, right? And so where we'll be walking through on a step-by-step, right? And so how to get this implemented, where we'll also talk about some of the work that we have done within this area for our other customers.
Correct.
So let's take that this thing, and let's bring all the pieces together now, right? So we spoke about we and obviously this is the technology aspect of that, right? So we spoke about some of the process in terms of what how it integrates to CI/CD, but then let's bring it all together, right? Bring up the organization, which is all of the different roles involved, right? So the process and the technology, bringing it all together. Uh, so Rod, so bouncing this back to you, right?
Yes.
So if we were to sort of sequence this thing in this manner, right? So what would be the, I would not say the starting point, but then in trying to bring this, we do see a lot of similarities and at least sort of synergies between what the process should be doing versus how the team should be working and versus how some of the components that we highlighted, right?
Yeah, this is a great view where everything you've heard here recently in this, webcast, this brings it together, right? So you can see, our top layer here to go through and really the technical team to build this out, right? And the steps they would go through to build the sprints and prepare for prod and deploy. Now, the subsequent process in the middle there to support this, these teams can be an individual team, could be a group of folks together, but you can see how this correlates with each other. And then down below, you got the technical alignment of, as you progress through these different process and the policies that, you can apply. I really like this view because it brings it all together and shows you the technical result of what happens, the process of how you want to organize this pod and the team together. And then the top, what really has to happen, from a technical perspective to bring it together. So this was a good overview to show how this all aligns and comes in together, Arvind. I like this.
Yeah. And obviously, for any organization to start looking at, right, so where do they begin with data ops? There are multiple starting points, and which is what we have seen in our experience too. It's never that it doesn't have to be a big bang approach, right? We can always look at, there could be specific entry points, and I guess that's what right and so matters most, right? So there are some key questions where you would start. For example, right? So do you already have DevOps within your environment? Do you have is your data environment, if not integrated, at least do you have a way of bringing all the data sources together, and you already have some kind of data integration in place? Obviously, you might have some kind of an agile delivery model, and you might already have adopted cloud in some way too. Now, it's not that the answer to all of these, and obviously these are not the only questions to ask, but doesn't have to be that you have to answer yes to all of these. But if you answer at least two or more of the above, any of these, for example, you might have a DevOps tool chain and you already have an integrated data environment, great, right? So then what you could do is to start looking at how you can take and create data sets and start maybe plugging that into your DevOps tool chain. Or if you already have parts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Arvind, I was just going to add, go ahead and, any organization could start down this path and take it as an MVP approach, right? And try the data ops approach with a creative pod and go down this path and try and bring this together. I mean, maybe you don't have DevOps, and that's okay. You can still, you'll be amazed at the cycle time you'll reduce once the first one, yes, you might need some assistance. Well, call ACS, right? We can give you a hand to get this going, but you should really consider this as a point to change how you deliver data within your enterprise.
Right, no, absolutely. And and which is where I think that's a good point to right. So bring this particular webcast to right. And so where we would like to close this particular webcast on, but obviously this is not the end, right? So this is the beginning, and there will be upcoming other webcasts where we'll be jumping into a lot more detail, both from a technology and a process perspective, and where we'll be showing some of these examples in much more greater detail, right? And we'll map this back to some example workloads, which might resonate with where your organization, right, and so might be in. But definitely that is something that right. So we look forward for all of you to participate. So Rod, Jason, and Veera, thanks a lot for taking part in this. So what we'll do is we'll take a pause at this moment here, right, and then let's jump into some of the questions which different teams have been and different participants have been bringing up, right. And so what we'll do is we'll go through some of these questions. For example, right. So why? Well, and which is an important question. Let's start off with that one. Why are we calling a resultant data set, right, after it is transformed as virtualized data set? So Veera, do you want to take that question up?
Sure, Arvind.
Okay, go on. So why do we call it as a virtualized data set?
So as I was discussing through, and also we have seen as part of the implementation, one of the ways we are trying to get data to a specific user or a specific team that is requesting for a specific set of data, it's not just coming from one source, or it's not just coming from one place. And the way we are trying to accumulate and do the data massaging between multiple sources of data and create a view out of it using underlying native technologies is what basically makes one call the data virtualized, because now here you're not basically making a replica or trying to stand up a different environment and clone the existing data and make a copy out of it for yourself, but you're trying to get access to the data that is needed as part of your requirement through views. And that's close to production like data. And at the same time, once you're done with your requirement, you just get it off of your plate, could be through the pod or could be through the mount. That's the reason we call the data as a virtualized data set, and it's faster to access, easy to stand up than the traditional approach.
Yep. Okay, great. So let's move on to another one that we have heard very often, right? So what's a data pod, and why are we calling it as a data pod?
Interesting question. I love this one when I hear this. So, as we were discussing, as part of our key components in the four major pillars, the one of it that you have seen where you're trying to get a virtualized and private workspace for yourself, that's what we call data pod for ourselves, where you have a container based workspace to work with. You have multiple components inside it, like having access and direct control over your virtualized data set being one, having a compute engine with an instance that has all the security policies and auto scaling groups pre-configured is two. You have an option to run a micro strategy or a simple microservice, which is Java based or Python based, or maybe just an in-house standalone application that you have developed, or maybe MicroStrategy, might not be microservice. So all these components together, encapsulated inside a container-based private workspace is what we call as data pod.
Okay, great. And we'll take maybe a couple of more questions. So one other question is, and I think we sort of pointed this out when we were showing the components, right? So can this be done outside AWS? And I guess we said that yes, right? So this can be done on AWS Azure and also on GCP. So it may not be the same services, obviously, but definitely can be implemented on all of the cloud platforms and also on premise. Now, obviously, that the way that even Veera was describing, right? So there has to be at least a mechanism to virtualize the data set. Otherwise, definitely it's going to consume a lot of compute and storage cycles, which might be limited in an on-prem environment. So within those constraints, right, so we'll have to see whether all of the components can be part of that particular DataOps implementation, or it needs to be a part of that, right? So Veera, I'll even defer to you if you want to add anything to that.
Yep, I completely agree with you. Where these all the components that we were discussing as part of the architecture and the DataOps implementation are completely mutually exclusive with respect to any cloud technology. In the example, we just took AWS, but doesn't really have to be AWS. Could be Azure, as you said, could be Google Cloud, as you said. It could be Cloud Foundry as well, maybe just a pivotal implementation of Cloud Foundry or something. And the best part is the entire architecture doesn't really have to be completely based on cloud. As we have seen, the Jenkins was off of the cloud. We were not using code deploy or code pipeline. So these are different components that can plug and play together to enhance your cycle time, increase your efficiency there. And yep, I agree with your point where complete on-prem might slow down, but still that's going to be a good start to get into hybrid or maybe cloud migration.
Okay, great. So those were some of the questions that right hands popped up. So as closing, right? So thank you all for attending. And like we were saying, feel free to contact us, send us a note at adc@acsicorp.com. We also have another webinar coming up where we'll do a deep dive into some of what you heard today. Right, so how do you implement the components and where do you start with DataOps within your organization? Handouts will be made available, and an entire video of this webinar will also be made available for both sharing and for viewing in a few days' time. So once again, I'd like to thank all of the attendees for joining us this afternoon, and of course, look forward to more such conversations. Thank you very much, Rod, Veera, and Jason. Thanks a lot for being a part of the panel and for providing all of your support on this.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Yep. Bye-bye.